Evening, everyone. Hello. So I noticed no one reminded me to unmute myself. Fortunately, I had done. So that works out well, a lot better than last week. So I thought we would discuss James Cleverly today. Now, inevitably, and there's already something come up in the chat, James Cleverly is a very mixed bag, isn't he? What I'm going to focus on today, we'll cover both sides of his Jekyll and Hyde personality. But what I'd like to focus on today is the fact that actually, and this is a distressing thing to have to say, he's one of the better cabinet ministers, not because he's more competent than most. There's no evidence to suggest that. He's certainly not a clever man, as again this week's antics demonstrate. But he at least doesn't mess about with culture wars. So there was he's done an interview for the Times. I don't know if it's the Times or the Sunday Times, in the terms of the print paper, because I'm looking at it. It was from yesterday, so I guess it was the Times. It was the Times, where he's basically said, "Will people stop going on about the Rwanda plan?" He hasn't said it's rubbish. I'll go over what he said in a moment. He hasn't said it's rubbish, but he has been saying, "Look, can you stop going on about it?" Because And first of all, he has also said, and he said this from the start, what he said, we can't believe in the European Convention of Human Rights or the European Court of Human Rights, whatever the Council of Europe is what they actually mean, but they just won't say. We can't believe in that because it underpins so many of the agreements we've got. Like cleverly makes the point that, for example, one of the reasons why the number of migrants crossing the Channel this year is down is because we got a returns agreement with Albania. And if we were to leave this common international framework, then there's all sorts of repercussions, but he makes it quite clear that a lot of the actual stuff we're doing that works and that we are legally allowed to do, we won't be able to do. So he is a strange one. But yes, Brad's just said there, Cleverly is now another Isaac Levido has to order to not be visible on the campaign trail after his equivalent for bigoted woman. Is there now actually any Tory minister who'll be allowed out? Well, this is the problem, isn't it? Now, for those who may not know, because you've spent your holiday this week under a rock. So a Labour MP in Prime Minister's Question Time this Wednesday, the Wednesday just gone, asked the Prime Minister, so James Cleverly wasn't even supposed to be saying anything, asked the Prime Minister why 34% of children in his constituency were in poverty. So a serious question that demands a serious answer. And the answer, before Rishi Sunak had got his arse off the seat, James Cleverly had said, because I don't know how, I'll wait till later because YouTube gets very funny about swearing early on. Shall we say he described the constituency in question, which is Stockton North in the northeast of England, in less than complimentary terms. And then he made it work, instead of just apologising, because do you know what? If it had just apologised, if it apologised there and then, it would have been done and dusted now. Because at the end of the day, who hasn't spoken in unflattering terms about some place or other? Quite a lot of people do it about their own hometowns. I actually quite like my hometown. But, I've heard plenty of people. Jeremy Clarkson doesn't. He hates Doncaster, and he has said so on many occasions. So, people have described various places in disparaging terms. It's not the most serious offence. You just apologise. But, there it is. He made it worse by pretending that he didn't say it. He pretended that he said something else which doesn't even sound the same. So he's dug himself a hole. So he's not a clever man, despite his name. He is nominative determinism's cruelest joke. James Cleverly of Braintree. So, do you know what? It'll be absolutely hilarious. I say hilarious, I mean tragic, but tragilarious. If after the election, James Cleverly either loses his seat, I don't actually know how, I think he's in a safe seat. So let's say he steps down and then he ends up being put into the House of Lords and he gets to be called Lord Cleverly of Braintree. That would be absolutely tragic and hilarious at the same time. But all that aside, he is still one of the best ministers in government. Simply because he doesn't waste time talking rubbish. I mean, it's not that he comes up with good solutions. Like, listen to it. So this, and I've linked in the description, but I've got two links. There's the Times article, which is actually the source article, but that's sort of behind a paywall a little bit. You can sign up and not pay and get a couple of articles, I think, a month or something, or a week. But then I've linked another one that's not behind a paywall, but that's secondary. So I'll go through some of the things he says. So he says that he's frustrated with the focus on Rwanda. He says it shouldn't be seen as the be-all and end-all. And he did describe it as an important part of the plans, and he says it will deter people from crossing the channel. Okay, that's rubbish. You say, well, oh, that's Phil, that's a load of rubbish, isn't it? It is. So what he's saying is rubbish, but the important thing is not so much what he says, what he does. Most of what politicians say is rubbish. Most of what Labour politicians say is rubbish. But it's what they do. What are they going to do? What are their policies? That's what matters. Not what they say, but what are their policies? It's not James Cleverly's policy to waste time with the Rwanda plan, which is why he's saying he's frustrated with people focusing on it as if it's the thing that's going to unlock everything. Particularly as it's clearly not, and it's probably not even going to result in planes taking off before the election. At which point, where do Tories who fixate on it end up going? Where do members of the public who fixate on it end up going? Oh, well, what's blocking it? Oh, in fact, it's not even the European Convention on Human Rights. The judge said so. He says there's loads of international obligations. If we left the European Convention on Human Rights, it wouldn't change the judgment, he said. But they don't care, because they don't actually want to send people to Rwanda, the people pushing this. They don't care. Why do they want to send 200 people a year to Rwanda? They don't give them monkeys. What they want is to remove human rights of 68 million people living in the UK. But there we go. Is this James Cleverly trying to drop the scheme, or James Cleverly trying to drop the scheme, or both? Well, this is it, isn't it? He would be delighted if it would just be dropped. What this interview makes clear is he's not going to waste his time on it. That's how I read it. He's saying he has to say that the Rwanda plan is a good one because it's formal government policy. Rishi Sunak is going far further than James Cleverly. James Cleverly is saying we should not be leaving the ECHR, whereas Rishi Sunak is going, well, we'll see. So James Cleverly is going a little bit further than it. But the other reason why for Rishi Sunak, James Cleverly will be a better Home Secretary than he's had for some time, or the government's had for some time, is because, first of all, he's a team player. He won't step a foot out of line. Suella Braverman was a complete loose cannon. James Cleverly, completely the opposite. He's delighted to be in such a senior role. He preferred being Foreign Secretary, it appears. He loved that because he got to swan around. Occasionally would have to say something, and that would be it. He basically goes around meeting people around the world. He seemed to like that. It didn't cause any trouble, to be fair. I don't think we can blame him for anything that flared up while he was Foreign Secretary. Unlike Dominic Raab or Liz Truss. I mean, we think about the predecessors, Liz Truss and Dominic Raab, they both presided over foreign affairs cock-ups, whereas James Cleverly, to be fair, didn't. Not that I can remember anyway. He actually sounded vaguely sensible on a few things. And it is a bit tragic that we have to sort of, because in a good government, James Cleverly would not be a cabinet minister because he's not competent and he's not clever. But at the very least, he is realistic. He identifies what he will see as a problem. It may not be a problem. I don't, for example, know what James Cleverly thinks about migration. Because shall we have a look at what caused all the fuss this week? Figures this week. This is what's in the same article, this Times article, but it's from the official figures. So this is what's got everyone all het up. The immigration figures, which show the net. And this doesn't show it as like the historical thing, which historically it's a massive record. But Cleverly does a normal job. The rest are away with the right-wing fairies. Well, that's ultimately it. It's a bit like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. James Cleverly is spoken of as a prospective replacement for Rishi Sunak. He'd be like a compromise candidate that would maybe be seen as weak, and he is weak. That would be a problem for them. Matthew there saying apparently James Cleverly is considered the sane candidate for Tory leader post-election. Well, you think about who you've got an option of. You've got James Cleverly, who's not bright. He's certainly not got a strong personality. He wouldn't stamp his authority on the party. He'd be just as weak as all the rest of them. You know, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss when it came to it, Boris Johnson, they were all weak leaders. All of them. I would say Theresa May and David Cameron were too weak, as in, you know, they could have stood up more than they did. But I wouldn't describe them as weak in the same way as I would Johnson onwards. So he wouldn't be a strong leader. But yeah, he's someone who doesn't want to mess about with culture wars, which are an expensive and waste of time, basically. But look at the alternatives. Penny Mordaunt can hold a sword. Big deal. Kemi Badenoch, you know, you don't really know what you get. She's very inexperienced, and you don't really know what you get. No, Tory MPs don't know what they're getting with her, because she is very far to the right. She really doesn't care about, you know, rights and so on. So she'd be the sort of person who, for political gain, would do whatever you wanted. But at the same time, you know, with the retained EU law bill, she showed that she was prepared to be pragmatic. You know, at the same time, she did what she was told to by Rishi Sunak. So again, you don't know what you'd get from her as leader. But I don't think you could regard her as the sane one when you consider the sorts of things she's been doing. Suella Braverman, I as time goes on, I get more used to the idea that probably Suella Braverman won't become the leader, because she has pissed off quite a lot of the right of the party. She upset a lot of people, including Liz Truss's posse, because she was a loose cannon. Remember, it's not like she was rebelling against Rishi Sunak because he shifted the party too far one way or the other. She was a loose cannon under Liz Truss as well. She was undermining Liz Truss at the party conference in 2022, sorry. You know, so she, and now that she's not even in cabinet, her profile is, the belief is that her profile will wane a little bit. We'll see. Give it a month or two and see then. Will saying, question about Badenoch's announcement about the Nissan Sunderland investment. He said on Twitter it created no jobs. How so? Because all it's doing is, even she said, all it's doing is securing jobs that are already there. It doesn't create new ones. Basically, what Nissan have said is we're going to carry on. So it's like the jobs aren't going yet. So for the next sort of cycle of business investment, those jobs will return. So that's not new jobs. That's the same jobs, because all it is a continuation of investment for stuff they're already doing. But obviously, you know, when a business, you know, when it announces an investment, like a major, it's always called a major investment. It doesn't matter whether it is or it isn't. Whenever it announces an investment, it's for a set amount of time. Your business model is for whatever it is, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, whatever, but it's for a set amount of time. And then as that cycle's coming to an end, you then decide where your next, what's going to be done with your next investment. Will they carry on, or will they move somewhere else, or will they just do a different line? And if they change anything, it can result in job losses. So in this case, it's not new jobs, it's the same jobs. No new jobs being added. John saying, Phil, I get Tories want to deregulate to get a slave workforce and uncontrolled pollution by big companies. It's not that they want the pollution, they just don't care. But why allow collapse of ability to do business because of tariff, cost or red tape barriers? Ultimately, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that almost no MPs knew what it meant. Almost no MPs knew what leaving the EU would mean, because they didn't actually understand the EU. The Eurosceptics, so to speak, almost all of them were just ideologically xenophobic. So there were two aspects of it. So first of all is the Nigel Farage type of Euroscepticism, where he just doesn't like foreigners, right? Then you've got the other ones, the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, where it's slightly different. They're no less ignorant, but it's slightly different in that what he wanted was, see, if he just wanted to make decisions in the UK, which is basically what Brexiteers openly said they wanted to do, because when the Conservatives are in power, they have 100% of the power to decide everything, and they will decide everything in the interest of the extremely wealthy, like him, people with a net worth in the like 8 figures, 8 or 9 figures, 9 figures in his case, I think. So that's where they come from. And, you know, if you have the EU deciding some regulations, some standards, you can't corrupt that. So that's why they wanted us to leave the EU. But most of the ones who went along with it just didn't understand it. And even they didn't understand it. Nigel Farage doesn't understand the EU. Doesn't understand Brexit. I think he's more aware than some of the Brexiteers, but he still doesn't really understand it. And Jacob Rees-Mogg certainly doesn't understand it. So they didn't realise what would happen when we left. Boris Johnson famously didn't have a clue. Had no idea. There was that famous thing. I know we're basing this on what other people have said, but it's not just Dominic Cummings that said it, it's multiple other people. That Boris Johnson, you know, towards the end of the towards the end of the withdrawal agreement negotiations, where he didn't really change very much from Theresa May's deal. There wasn't time. You know, and things were being explained to him, and he said, okay, yes, I get that, thinking that they meant a no deal. And he says, but what happens with the deal? And they said, Prime Minister, this is with the deal. And he couldn't believe it. But he'd already committed himself. And that's the problem. The Tory MPs had all committed themselves. They're fully behind Brexit now. This idea that every time the Tories just sort of stop still a minute and maybe even say something nice about the EU, and everyone thinks, oh, the Tories are going to take us back into the EU. It's like, no. They may do further down the line, but they're not going to without being beaten very badly for a long time. Because they're totally committed. They're never going to get back. They have to, at some point, get back onto us needing to rejoin. But in order to do that, they have to get rid of all the people that have nailed their colours to the mast. They've just got to go. And it'll take many years to do that. Well, it'll take a number of years. It'll take at least 2 elections. Kemi Badenoch speaks in such strange terms that I don't think anyone understands her. I'm not sure she understands herself. She's not. Again, a lot of these people now who are in very senior positions in the government are not really long-term politicians. Like, sometimes we use the word career politician, and I don't think a government should just be full of career politicians, but I do think you benefit from some. You know, people who entered Parliament as very young men and women and have been politicians for a very long time. They bring with it, quite a lot of experience about how politics works in practical terms. Whereas the problem is, if you get someone who didn't know anything about politics until they just randomly decided to be an MP. There were so many, and a lot of these you've got 2 main cohorts which are really destructive for the Tories at the moment. There's the 2015 cohort and the 2019. So in 2015, there were a lot of new Tory MPs. And a lot of these MPs were not people who'd been active in politics and then became candidates and then won. A lot of them, people like Rishi Sunak, people like Suella Braverman, people like Kemi Badenoch, although, was she 2015 or was she later? But, you know, people like that didn't have a political background before they literally went from knowing nothing about politics to being an MP. So at the point at which you're an MP, you're sort of very high, you're very close to the top of the tree. So you also don't think you've got a lot to learn. So, but the other problem is specifically the 2019 cohort, because they all came as a result of this. They don't know anything. They know even less about politics because they came on the back of this central thing, Brexit. And that's why they think they need something like this for the next election. They sort of know it can't be Brexit again. That's why they're going on about the Rwanda scheme, because it's the thing. You know, like it was as far as they're concerned, get Brexit done got them their jobs. So now they need to get something done. Well, what have we got? Oh, Rwanda plan. Get the Rwanda plan done. So they're actively wanting Rishi Sunak. I mean, he's even suggested he would, but this may be just to placate them. They actually want Rishi Sunak, in all honesty, to go to the polls saying to the public, just like Boris Johnson. I'll take you back to 2019. In 2019, Boris Johnson didn't have a majority. So he said to the public, the reason Parliament is deadlocked is because we don't have a majority. Vote for a majority for me and I can do all of these things. I'll have the power to do all of these things I'm promising. He got a massive majority, and not as massive as Labour are going to get next time, but he got a massive majority and then did nothing with it apart from take us out of the EU. But they think they need the same thing. They think Rishi Sunak needs to go to the electorate and say, I'm struggling to get this Rwanda plan going. Give me the mandate to do it. But it's like, what? So that's what they want him to do, because they just think that's how politics works. Whereas most of the voting public, certainly the important voting public, just want a government to make things work. They don't, sometimes, the grand thing, yeah, that works, but mostly they just want things to just function. Isn't getting into politics an MP's job description? Once they're an MP, yeah, they are then in politics. But it'd be quite nice if MPs were people who were active in politics beforehand. I mean, you take, what's his name now? Keir Mather, the young lad in his mid-20s who won for Labour in Selby and Ainsty, right? You think, well, young lad. But he's been active in politics probably longer than Rishi Sunak. Because he was very active in politics even as a teenager. So he is more experienced at politics than Rishi Sunak in terms of being actively engaged in politics. So, you want... And he obviously, you wouldn't describe him as... You wouldn't put him in the cabinet. You certainly wouldn't make him the Prime Minister. Whereas you can get someone who's in his 40s and you think, oh, he'd be all right as Prime Minister. It's like, yeah, but he's only been in politics since 2015. He wasn't like a local councillor or even just like me, like a politics nerd or anything. He had no interest in politics, knew nothing about politics. Said so himself at one of his Meet the Prime Minister meetings this year. He actually said, he's hard. In fact, he tried to claim he's been in politics for a shorter amount of time than he's been an MP, which is an odd one. But he's certainly given the impression he had no idea. Sarah saying, Phil, I Googled Boris Johnson alcoholic yesterday and didn't come up with much. Where's the evidence? Not that I'm disagreeing with you, just curious. Because he's always drinking. Like, people close to him, like, he's always drinking. Constantly pissed. And obviously you're not going to see much in the mainstream media about it, other than when people are actually talking about him. Why isn't there a standard of experience for political candidates? Surely going to Eton and Oxford shouldn't be enough. Well, actually, if anything, that should actively discourage you. But no, in reality, I mean, universal suffrage doesn't just require that everyone has a right to vote, but that everyone has a right to stand. You can't really exclude people. Because as soon as you introduce the idea that there should be certain standards of parliament, because you think about it as like an idealist, and you think, well, shouldn't we have clever people and well-intentioned people and people who've got, proven, wins under the belt? They've done something with their life. And at that point, you start to say, okay, so then who decides what makes the grade? And do you trust those people? So, because who would do it? It would be people. People would decide what those qualities should be. And even if you try to get a computer to come up with it, whoever programs the computer sets that computer program's parameters, and they're sort of effectively deciding as well. So you don't trust people to decide. So you just literally have to say, well, sort of anyone should be able to stand. At which point you have to accept the notion that it is the lesser of evils, that you can end up with people who are totally unfit for office achieving high office. You hope, I mean, if the majority of politicians, regardless of their political disagreements, if the majority of politicians, MPs, were in politics in the national interest, then you'd have just enough sort of checks to make sure that they only promoted the best amongst them. The problem is that a great many politicians are not in it for the public interest, or if they are, they're not prioritising it. So there's a lot of Tory MPs, for example, some of whom were not bad people as such, but they prioritised their electoral success. They voted for Boris Johnson to make it onto the final ballot to go to the membership, which then, of course, made him leader, on the basis that he would win the election and therefore their seat. So they were doing it. So it's not that these people wanted it's not that they believed Johnson would be a great prime minister, and it's not that they wanted a bad prime minister in place. They just accepted it as a price for electoral success. And that's where it falls down. But it's not obvious to me what there is. Like, I don't know how you come up with a valid system of saying this person is clearly not suitable. It's very easy to look at someone like Boris Johnson and say this person is not suitable for Parliament. It is demonstrably unsuitable for Parliament. But how do you come up with a reasonable set of criteria that would be agreed across the political spectrum in principle? Very difficult. One of the reasons why I voted was I was watching Panorama. It was on the collapse of Gaddafi. It was mentioned that because it wasn't part of the EU, they could freeze Gaddafi instantly. Not sure. UK had to tell the other 27 member state and EU commissioner also a number of notices if we had to do something. I think okay. There's getting something mixed up there. I should read the things before I read it out because I'm not sure what that's going on about. Sorry, I think that's part of something else. Politics become jobs for the boys or girls from right families, backgrounds, contacts, who you know now, not what you know in the Tory party. Well, it's like that in a lot of parties, like that in the Labour Party to an extent as well. It is. I mean, one thing I would say, I've mentioned this before, I think I mentioned it quite recently. John's just mentioned the Billy Connolly test. Yeah, the Billy Connolly test was that wanting to be a politician should automatically exclude you from being it. At which point, then, you only end up with MPs who've had a gun put to their head. Because that's the thing I always would say to an MP that moans about some aspect of their job, or they moan about how unfair the media are and things like that. And this applies to Tories as well as Labour. I mean, I used to say it all the time about people whining about the way the media treated Corbyn. And it's like, stop whinging. No one put a gun to your head and no one made him be the Labour leader. No one made him be an MP. Stop whining about it. The only MPs who can complain about anything that will get any sympathy at all from me are ones who literally have, and I mean real hate mail sent to them or like threats of violence. That's not on. But or are actually attacked, or their staff attacked, or their families threatened. Things like that. Yes, that's not on. You can complain about that. But any the media were mean to me. Shut up. So, but what I would always say to those MPs, if they want to complain about it, it's like, no one forced you to be an MP. In fact, in any given constituency, there are always multiple people who would have liked to be in your position. Whatever constituency you pick, the MP that won it whatever party they're in, there'll have been other members of that party in that constituency that would have been more than happy to be the candidate. Not always loads, especially if it's like a margin. If you won, technically it was winnable, but it might have been a very tough contest. But there would have been others who would have been happy to have had that job. So stop complaining. But the problem with the Billy Connolly idea is you would literally end up with a whole parliament full of people that were forced into it against their will. I'm not sure that necessarily works. Billy Connolly has been my favourite stand-up comedian, but I'm not sure he's someone that should be designing electoral systems, if I'm honest. Viv's saying there, I mean, look at Fabricant or Doris, who's bonkers enough to vote for these people. Well, that's it. Candidates like that, the same applies to Suella Braverman and Priti Patel and Liz Truss. They can only really win in very safe seats. You don't really find these candidates in other seats. Like if you look at someone like Lee Anderson, you go, what about Lee Anderson then? Well, yeah, I mean, that was a seat that, as far as the Tories had not won it before, it was a Labour seat, but it was, for that election, a safe Tory seat. The Tories were going to win that all day long, no matter who they had. He hardly had to do anything. In fact, he mostly didn't. Whereas, you know, so if you had an actual marginal where you've got an actual real contest going on, very difficult to win it with a completely batshit crazy candidate. Very difficult indeed. In fact, if you end up with a really crazy candidate winning by a small margin, I'm probably going to suggest that it was actually a much safer seat and they made it marginal with their lunacy. So you do tend to find that a lot of real nut jobs, proper out there space cakes, are probably in safe seats. You know. Do the election results in the Netherlands show some of the drawbacks of PR? No, it shows the strength of PR. If it weren't for PR, then Wilders would be the Prime Minister now, and that would be all there's to it, with 100% of the power. See, that's the difference. He may have, all his party's done is win more seats than any other party. With first past the post, he'd probably have a majority government, wouldn't he? Or very close to it. And even if it was just very close to it, he'd be able to find a junior coalition partner. Now, as it is with his party in the Netherlands, in order to form a government, his party is going to be a minority in that government. His party will be, it won't really, because he'll not find one other party to go with. It'll be multiple parties, but his party will represent less than 50% of that government. That's a strength of PR. That is a strength of PR. And because he is so extreme, one of two things will have to happen. One, either he will have to massively temper his more insane policies in order to get a working coalition, or he won't do that. Although he says he'll compromise, well, he'll have to compromise. Or if he doesn't compromise enough, then some other parties will just cobble together their own coalition and he'll still be in opposition. So, I don't get where people are sort of, there's several people I've seen say, you know, this is a problem of PR, it allows in extremists. No, it doesn't. It keeps them out. Keeps them out. It can keep him out. Doesn't matter that he's won more seats than any other individual party. He hasn't won more seats than are necessary to form a government. What's my opinion of Starmer, the ones who resigned over Palestine? All considerations regarding Palestine aside, I think it makes Keir more electable. I don't know that it actually has any great bearing on the public. The fact is the polls show that Labour has maintained strong support in public. It's basically maintained it for quite a long time, all through summer and beyond. So, and he had to adopt that position. I don't think it makes any... It's like, it's neutral. If he'd have cocked it up, if he'd have given in to pressure from people who are trying to bring him down anyway, I mean, why would anyone do that? Why would anyone give in to pressure from people who want you removed from power, who don't have your interests at heart? But if he had done, then that would have cocked it up very badly. So as it happens, it's just a neutral position. It's died down now because there is a ceasefire. Then there won't be again. But by the time the election comes around, then it won't be done and dusted with, because that's going to always flare up. But it will be back on hiatus at least. Clive Lewis got grief just for attending a conference on Britain's future in Edinburgh. I don't know about that. So Clive sounds like a good guy. I'd vote for him. Right. Well, here's what I think. On a personal level, on a policy level, I like Clive Lewis a lot. But I do say quite a lot that if you are, say, a Labour MP, the same applies to a Lib Dem MP, Green MP, there's only one of those, and or a Conservative MP or anyone else, you didn't get elected as an independent. You didn't stand as an independent. You stood under the party's banner. Why did you stand under the party's banner? Because that is how you were going to get elected. So there's a covenant. You support your party. Now, where I have a major beef with Clive Lewis is he does not do that. He doesn't do that. So I have, it's like I would support him. I would certainly share a platform with him. In fact, I've attempted to, on a great many of the policies that he would like to see realised. But at the same time, I would also say I wouldn't want to see him. Like, it would be foolish to bring him into government because he hasn't got the discipline. He's a loose cannon. He's not the worst of the loose cannons, but he is a loose cannon. Perhaps new MPs should get a better induction and quick politics education. See, they do that. They do have inductions. I don't know how good they are. But at the same time, if you're really arrogant and you don't, at the end of the day, if you're really arrogant, like, you're just going to ignore the lessons, aren't you? Particularly, like, it's possible that some MPs, when they first become MPs and they go to the induction, they go, oh, this is how we have to behave. Okay, that's fine. And then they observe colleagues behaving, like, breaking all those rules and nothing happening to them. So, like, what can an induction do if you're observing other people breaking the rules quite blatantly and suffering no ill effects? Quite a lot of these MPs know what they're doing. And they know what they're supposed to do and just choose not to anyway. I don't understand why Clive Lewis got so little support for leader and is not on the Labour front bench. Well, I can't speak. I can tell you why he's not on the Labour front bench, because he's not a team player. He is a Sweller Braverman. Like, in terms of the fact that it would be madness to introduce it, because he will just shit the bed. And then that'll be that. He'll either resign or have to be sacked, because he's incapable of towing the party line. Again, he's not the worst of them. He doesn't make a point of trying to undermine the leadership, but he does nonetheless do that, which is the idea of collective responsibility seems to elude him. I don't know why he didn't get more support. I have to confess, at the time, because a lot of this behaviour that I'm describing of Clive Lewis became evident in the last few years. At the time when he threw his hat into the ring, I was actually interested in potentially supporting Clive Lewis. It wasn't all Keir Starmer from the start. I looked at some of the others, and Clive Lewis stuck out for me. If I was to hazard a guess as to why he didn't get a lot of support, I would suggest try and think where that support would come from. It wasn't going to come from Camp Corbyn, because they wanted their puppet in charge, which was the Bailey bot. So he wasn't going to get their support. And if you're talking about MPs, Labour MPs, who wanted a leader who was actually going to attempt to unite them and get them match fit for the next election, again, that's not going to be Clive Lewis. Because, someone who doesn't support the Labour leadership, it's like, where's their moral authority to demand support if they were the leader? But that is my speculation. I actually have no idea. But I just look at it as which sort of group of Labour MPs would support him. There was only going to be a few. I can't see how any major faction would think that he's the boy to back. But anyway. May as well have AI MPs. what happened to listening to everyone. Well, again, if you have anything like that, the person who programs them is the one who sets the parameters. Like, we talk about AI. In reality, it's not. It's a bit of a misnomer because it's not really intelligence. It might be at some point. There can come a point where, and maybe quite soon, but at the moment, it's still not. Someone has set parameters. You say Clive for PM, but people say things like that. That's how we ended up with Boris Johnson. I'm not saying he'd be bad like Boris Johnson, but a prime minister has to fundamentally have literally the confidence of the House. They have to be a team player. They have to be people who bring together people with different views. They can't be people. You can't have an effective prime minister who's certainly not in Labour, definitely not in Labour. You cannot have someone who says, this is the way it should be, this is the correct decision, so this is what we're going to do. Because particularly people in Labour, MPs in Labour, will go, oh, we don't agree with that. Conservatives are a little bit different. If you're a really strong personality, they're like Margaret Thatcher. There was a point, not all the way through Thatcher's leadership, but there was a point in Thatcher's leadership when she basically was the boss. And she would just say, this is what we're doing. That's all there is to it. And if anyone disagrees with me, I'm going to kick them in the nuts and bash them over the head with my handbag. So you can sort of, in the Conservatives, if you're strong enough, you can sort of get them to go along with things. But even then, I mean, it won't last forever. And as soon as you slip up, you're out, as indeed she was. But in Labour, you'll never get away with that. Ever. Because people, you have to persuade them that something is the right decision. John says, I saw Starmer's interview by James O'Brien. It showed how the dull label is media spin. The guy has done so much. It's clever and more suited than the last 6 or 7 PMs. Very possibly. But then that is his own fault as well. If he has, like, there was a thing that apparently was some sort of stupid joke, but it shouldn't have been, where he might do a podcast. He should 100% do the podcast. I keep saying, he should do it with me. I'll do it. It'd be brilliant. Matthew said, I rated Barry Gardiner. Surprised he didn't run for leader. He was a good community, was politically astute. I'm going to have to pick on that last one, though. He's not bad. Yeah, his communication skills are all right. But politically astute, you've got to remember this is the same guy who dropped a massive bollock during the 2019 general election campaign. He could unite Corbynites and the centre-left. He absolutely could not. I'm going to promise you that. He wouldn't even want to try. No, he's not that astute. He's a decent... He comes across well on the media. I'll give him that. But he's not politically astute. Listening to too few people ends up with hard Brexit solutions. Well, ultimately, yeah. I mean, if you're going to be shaping policy, major policy, you absolutely have to test it to destruction before it ever makes it even into a white paper. You've got to be prepared to do that. That's why, again, we bring it back to James Cleverly here. Let's bring him. I was talking about in the beginning. This is why I hate to use the word impressive because it's just such a low bar that you can't really describe James Cleverly as impressive. But such is the Stockholm syndrome, shall we say. It's incredible that he's not wasting time. We've got someone who was in Boris Johnson's cabinet, Liz Truss's cabinet, and Rishi Sunak's cabinet. And he must be the only constant who's just no nonsense. It's like, in his mind, Rwanda plan, he recognises that the government stuck with it. He recognises that the Tories have invested so much into it that you can't just drop it. He recognises that. So he says, it's an important part of the process, of course. But he also makes clear he's not going to waste his time on it because it is an epic waste of time. And that is a useful trait. Someone asking, Barry Gardiner, Stella Creasy and Dawn Butler, are they loose cannons? Yeah. The reason why they're not as destructive, if you're comparing to, say, some of the Tory loose cannons, you've got to consider the context. right? Labour are on for a win. So even the loose cannons sort of have their heads down because they know they do want Labour to win. They want Labour to form a government. Whereas the Tories are on for a loss. So it's much easier. Like, if someone disagrees with a particular direction, it's much easier to sort of keep them quiet if the current course is clearly going to win than it is if it's going to lose. Dawn Butler, for goodness sake, Dawn Butler publicly said that she was going to call for a vote of no confidence in Keir Starmer's leadership in 2021. Publicly came out with it. If that is not a loose cannon, I do not know what is. Viv's saying, look how they sacked 20-odd MPs of the Tory party for not towing the line on Brexit. Yeah, well, that was an odd one. Like, you could, in terms of withdrawing the whip, there are conditions under which you can do it, and there are conditions under which doing it for it was about 20, give or take, one or two, would be acceptable, although it's a bit strange. First of all, if they are, I mean, what were they doing? Were they basically calling out the leadership? Were they actually trying to undermine the leadership? No, they weren't. Voting against something that was not a manifesto promise is not undermining the leadership, right? And that's the important thing to note. They weren't doing anything which contradicted the manifesto on which they were elected. So that was just Boris Johnson. Well, it was really Dominic Cummings, but it was Boris Johnson nominally who was saying, right, it showed how Sunak should have done it, because it was Boris Johnson basically saying anyone steps out of line and they're not going to be an MP just before an election. This is the power that Rishi Sunak had. He technically still has the power now. It's just that if he'd have used it earlier this year, he could have used it sparingly. You know, think about some of the reasons why people have had the whip withdrawn for going on, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. That has had people have the whip withdrawn, and yet not actively undermining the leadership. That doesn't get the whip withdrawn. If he'd have done that, Suella Braverman wouldn't have stepped a foot out of line. And if she had, let's say she's crazy enough to have done it anyway, because it's possible, he just removed her. He could have sacked her a long time ago. He was too weak. And the thing is now, it's like, if you're going to try and argue, and it is a reasonable argument, if Sunak could have tried it, would it have provoked a rebellion? Well, he's sort of done that now anyway. He's now made himself a target for the right of his party. He's now, as far as they're concerned, he's cut them off because they don't feel they've got representation. Now, there are members of them still in cabinet, likes of Kemi Badenoch, for example. We have to remember, like, James Cleverly is ERG, but they sort of see them as having gone native, if you like. So really, Sunak has got rid of the ones who were forcing Sunak to do things, if you see what I mean. When I become PM, will I give all the members tax-free status? No, certainly not. I'll be taxing you all more. But again, I mean, obviously, you know, again, to be a prime minister, you have to be able to. Your government will be chaotic if you cannot get about 320 odd MPs to consistently vote the way you want them to vote. You need to do that. So Stella Crease is brilliant. Another one overlooked for Labour's front bench because she speaks the truth. You say because she speaks the truth. Do you know what? That is a disqualifier for being on the front bench. What? You cannot... right, people don't vote. People say they want honest politicians. They're lying themselves. They don't vote for honest politicians. Honesty gets... Because honesty isn't comfortable. People want easy solutions. The reason people vote for a government is to say to that government, make our lives better. We don't care how you do it, just do it, right? Some of us care how they do it, not that many. Really, when it comes down to it, not that many care. Just make our lives better. So honesty is I always talk about there's a difference between honesty and political honesty. Political honesty isn't really honesty. It's honesty about what you're going to do, not what you say. You cannot win an election by being completely honest about what you're going to do, because it sounds scary. If Labour were completely honest about what they're saying, then they wouldn't be winning the election. Now, they need to be honest about what they're going to do, because that's important, because you can't screw the voters over. You can be dishonest about what you say, but not about what you say you're going to do, if you see what I mean. And also, there's a great many people that I think could be on the front bench, just in terms of competence and, like, you know, political acumen. But again, there's lots of other qualities you need as well. I'd be even if I were an MP, I would just be on the back benches. I would be a terrible minister. I do hope Labour are in power long enough for major investigations on corruption to get to prosecute the lot of them. I mean, it's not my priority. It is important. I mean, apart from anything else, if they get away with it, then why won't the next time we have a corrupt government, they'll feel they can get away with it as well. But I want more than just prosecutions. I want systems put in place to make it more difficult to happen again. That's always the most important thing. How do you stop it happening again? The prosecutions ultimately will help to shine a spotlight on it, but mostly the reason why you prosecute for someone like this is as a deterrent to stop either them or someone else wanting to repeat it. I want to see those run as PM to do Taskmaster so we can see how they think, show us how good they are at problem solving. I don't know, because there's an extent to which the Prime Minister, ironically, doesn't have to be good at problem solving, because they don't have to come up with systems. Their officials will do that for them. What a Prime Minister needs to be able to do is they need to be able to sound plausible to the public. They need to be able to pick the right people to occupy certain positions. And they need to be able to approve of the right general policy areas. That's all an MP, a Prime Minister, needs to do. That is as easy or as difficult as their job is. Can they come across well to the public? That's where Starmer will have a big question mark. Can they get the right people into the right positions? That's where you'd sort of say at the moment, yeah, that's going okay. And can he work out, as in when he's presented with possible solutions to problems, can he pick the right one? Because he doesn't have to come up with the solutions. Indeed, it wouldn't be appropriate for him to come up with the solutions. He's a lawyer. You know, he's not a project manager, even though he will have managed projects in the past. I could see Phil being a better PM than Boris. I could see Larry the Cat being a better PM than Boris. That's not a bar. It's no great accolade to be more fit for office than Boris Johnson. I could do eeny, meeny, miny, mo down the street with members of the public and end up the politically correct version of eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And I could end up with someone who would probably be better than Boris Johnson. So I was saying the Boris bus was honest enough. No, because he didn't do it. He didn't give the NHS more money. He gave them less money. So he wasn't honest. Political honesty is what you do. The bus promised more money for the NHS. It did not get more money. Got less money in real terms. What was it? Hold on. This is something. Again, this was in the Financial Times ages ago, but it's worth bringing it up again. I want to stick it up again because someone else responded to this exactly as I would, and this is what Labour should be. I describe it as this is what Labour should have on all their campaign leaflets. Let me just get this. It should be through every letterbox in the country during the general election campaign at some point. All right, let me get it. Hold on. Here it is. Right. that should be every voter in the country should see that. I mean, that is it's just things like that. I keep saying, like, that's what you need. You get a campaign leaflet and you don't want loads of text on it. People don't read it. But if you pick that up off your doormat or out of your letterbox on your way to put it in the bin in the kitchen, that can catch your eye. Something like that can catch your eye. Why do politicians need advisors who are just kids not long out of university? That in terms of senior politicians, that is a really good question. Do you know what? Cannot tell you. It's madness to me. You know, I get that there are going to be people who leave university and they end up working with a politician. But, you know, working the constituency office or something, being an actual advisor to a senior member of the government straight out of university, you don't know anything. You might be really clever. Occasionally, some of them might be really clever, and they'll have been interested in politics for a very long time. But you know, do your apprenticeship, for goodness sake. University is not an apprenticeship for anyone. Like, even doctors have to have like a junior house officer period after they've finished their studies, and you have to work your way up the tree before you become a consultant. The idea that you get paid. Imagine the situation with doctors. Imagine if you had someone straight out of university being made a consultant surgeon. You would never do that. And yet, and people can understand how mad that would be. Assuming they know what a consultant surgeon's responsibilities are. As soon as you tell them, because they don't just perform the surgery. I mean, that would be enough to say, no, I don't want someone straight out of university, thank you. But, you know, if you told them what other things they do, other decisions they have to be able to make, and you would go, well, that'd be madness. No, of course you've got to spend years studying further and learning under more experienced senior surgeons before you can do that yourself. And yet we will allow people to advise the Prime Minister without any sort of apprenticeship, without any sort of experience. David Cameron, when he wasn't long out, when did he? Let me have a look exactly. He was Norman Lamont's advisor when Norman Lamont was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Let me have a look. Hold on. Let me see how old he would have been at the time. Just as a very rough one, because I'm sort of running out of time now. Oh, come on. No. So he was born in 1966. So he wouldn't have been long out of university when he was Norman Lamont's advisor. He'd been in his mid-20s. Madness. He'll have been out of university and then almost straight in to advising the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Absolutely crazy, isn't it? Let me just have a look what... So in fact, this is Cameron's Wikipedia page. After graduation, he worked for the Conservative Research Department between 1988 and 1993. His first duty was trade and industry, energy privatisation, blah, blah, blah. Where's the thing with Norman Lamont? In 1991, so at this he would have been 25 years old, Cameron was seconded to Downing Street to work on briefing John Major for the then twice-weekly sessions of Prime Minister's Questions. What? Anyway, never mind. Judging COVID inquiry says she hates graphs. Most people hate graphs. But something like this is, you don't look at it as a graph. It's just a visual representation. It's really clear. You know, waiting lists under the Conservatives, or you've got two Conservative governments sandwiching a Labour government. And it couldn't be more stark. It's not like the waiting lists were a little bit up during the Conservatives' period of office, and Labour's was a little bit down, where you might say, oh, it's down to this or that or the other. It's like rising all the time under, you know, Thatcher and Major, and then lowering under Labour, like quite steeply, and then rising just if not more steeply under the Conservatives. And also it exposes the lie that it was all to do with the pandemic, because you can see it was rising. Yes, the gradient shot up with the pandemic, but that was because we'd already broken the NHS before the pandemic. Look at it. Something like that. Labour could have shown that graph in 2019. Yes, it should have been through every letterbox. I keep saying it. There's lots of things I would like to just say to Labour, who themselves are probably listening to people straight out of university, nout. But, if I could just give them one brief message that wasn't very complicated, it's put stuff like that through letterboxes. If you're going to spend money, here's the thing, it doesn't cost very much to print out the leaflets. The main resource with delivering leaflets is the poor activists who have to do goodness knows how many steps a day delivering the things. You owe it to those activists who are giving up their time and energy to deliver those leaflets, that those leaflets are decent, that they're going to cut through to the public. The number of political leaflets I have seen that are just crap, you just look at them and go, you've got, they do it on the assumption that people will read it. They'll go, oh, a political leaflet through my letterbox. How delightful. I've been waiting for this for ages. I'm really bored. I'm going to read the whole thing now. No, they're not. They're going to take it out of that letterbox and they're going to throw it in the bin. So any message that you're going to get through to them has to be one that they can just glance as they pick it up off the floor or pull it out of the letterbox. Because after that, it's by their side because they're walking to the bin and it's in the bin. Grass can be very easy to mistrust, though. That is why you always say something like this. This is like big thing. Sources, FT analysis of NHS England. Except Labour would put on that sources, Financial Times analysis, respected, of NHS England. So it's official then. You're crediting it and it's come from officialdom. But anyway, we're sort of run out of time. Let's go through this last one from Parcel. It says Cummings' big idea was to replace much of the civil service and their EU's task of asking views on every measure from relevant people and bodies with a new elite to think about it. Yeah. Yes, what did he call it? Oddballs and something else he created. Misfits and oddballs or something. He specifically said he wanted to get the decision makers being misfits and oddballs. Hence why when it was reported, and we don't know how accurate this was, but when it was reported that Dominic Cummings had advised Rishi Sunak to do mental stuff, and that it was believable. I don't know whether it's true, but it's believable. You can believe it of Dominic Cummings because it's how he behaves. Weirdos and misfits, thank you. But there we go. Last comment here says Tories handing out leaflets door to door in Somerset already. Declined to take one, but wish I had now just to see what's on. Oh yeah, always take one. See what they're saying, that they think will work. Absolutely, always take one. Good for a laugh. But they are, they are going to be. That's why Parliament isn't doing very much at the moment. That's why there wasn't much in the King's speech. It was primarily to allow Tory MPs lots of time to spend in their constituencies because they've got a real fight on their hands. Like, if you look on the YouGov poll, the Conservatives gained 4 points this week, right? It was, I think, after the budget, so it might be related to that. But it could also just be a rebalancing because it puts the lead back on about 19 points. But you plug that in, you plug that in to electoral calculus's MRP model, and it still comes out with the Conservatives winning 135 seats. Now, I think they'll probably win more than that. I keep saying, I think YouGov, like a lot of online pollsters, are amplifying Reform UK's share of vote. We will see. But nonetheless, they're still going to lose really badly. Lord Lamont, please, Phil. He was not Lord Lamont at the time, was he? Is he even still alive? I'm not sure he was entirely alive when he was in government. But anyway, we'll have to leave it there. We'll run over time again. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a good evening. And until next time, I'll see you later.